Mexico to be missionaries, and we had about 3 months where we had a team there, and it was an absolutely incredible time being out in the colonias and ministering to people. And after the 3 months, the teams left and went back to their homes, and so it was just myself and David and our 2 children in Mexico. We didn't speak the language, and we didn't really have a lot of finances. So at this time, it was about from August to December, was a very, very difficult time financially for us as a family. So there were times when our children were sick and we couldn't take them to the doctor. There were times when we had a bag of rice on the shelf and didn't have $1 to get across the border back into the States. And during this time, there were many times when David and I were down on our knees before our sofa in Mexico praying, and I just remember saying, you know, God, the only reason we are still here is because you called us. And so we went through these months that were very difficult. And before we went to Mexico, we had to give up everything in New Zealand. And so one of the things that I had to give up was a sewing machine. And when we got down to Mexico, my mom gave me my grandma's old sewing machine. And during this time, you know, when you go through a really difficult time, things can kind of compound. And I was making a baby gift as a quilt as a gift for some friends. And this machine that I was using, the sewing machine, kept breaking. And I remember being so frustrated, you know, and just saying, God, you know, the least you could have done was given me a decent sewing machine. And as we were working through this hard time, it was getting a little bit closer to Christmas, and we didn't really have the money, you know, Christmas presents. And we got asked to go up to Houston, Texas, which was about 5 hours away, and speak at this church. So we had enough gas in our car to get up to Houston, but we didn't have enough gas to get back down to the border. But as we prayed about it, we felt like God wanted us to go up to Houston and speak at this church. So we got our 2 kids into the car, and we drove up to Houston, and we shared what God had been doing in the ministry in the colonias. And we didn't really bring into, you know, as we were talking about where we were financially or anything like that. We just shared what God was doing in the ministry and in the lives of the Mexican people. And once we were done sharing, the pastor asked if they could pray for us. So the people got up and they came around us and they prayed for us in our ministry. And then the back doors of the church opened, and in came 3 people with 5 huge bags of Christmas presents for our family. And they gave us these 5 bags of Christmas presents. They gave us $500 cash. We had been given a gas grill, a lot of personal items. They fixed everything that was wrong on our car, and they filled our car back up with gas. So as we drove back down to Mexico, we were just overwhelmed with the goodness of God and just His faithfulness. And as we got to our apartment, it was about 11 o'clock at night, and we walked up the stairs, and there was a note on the door. And David took it and read it, and then he turned to me and said, "Here, this is for you." And as I read it, it said, you know, God has blessed us, and we want to be a blessing to you. You can pick up a brand new sewing machine at Sears tomorrow. So after being completely blessed by this church, God then kind of threw the cherry on top. But one of the things that really stood out to me about this season of our lives is that's probably one of my favorite stories of God's blessing, because it was just Him adding a little bit extra. But the other really special thing about that story is when we went through that difficult time, you know, for months we didn't see any outcome. It was difficult. We were down on our knees praying. But during that time, God was teaching us something that carried us far further in life, really. He taught us perseverance, and that even though things were difficult, He had called us, and He was taking care of us. He was providing for our needs. It wasn't necessarily how we thought He maybe should have provided for it, but He provided in His own way and taught us something that was so much more special in the midst of our trials.
Good morning. If you've been around the last few weeks, you know we've been in the book of Hebrews, and just big thanks to Trina, and you've probably may have seen Trina and Dave and their family around. Say hello to them when you see them around. Mexico is a great place for miracles. A few weeks ago, uh, myself and my daughter Leah were decided, we were in the States, and we had a couple of days to kill before heading off to a conference. And we decided to do something cultural, and we thought we might go and take a road trip from LA down to Tijuana. And we thought that would be a great idea. Somebody said to me, you know, Karl, you probably should have a look at the travel warnings that are out there for Tijuana. And I did. I had a look, and it kind of said things like, you know, don't drive in Tijuana. Like, that's a really bad thing to do. I read that if you hire a car in the States, by no means should you take that car into Tijuana. It's illegal, for one thing. And for another thing, when apparently when some people see American cars, they kind of hijack them. So I kind of read that, and I thought, okay, so here's the plan. So before we left here, I made this plan, and I booked a motel in Tijuana, and the plan was to drive down to the border, park the car in one of those big safety car park things with cameras and really secure, and then we would catch the shuttle that every tourist catches, and they take you direct to your motel, and you don't even have to it's just really easy. And this was the advice that you should do. So I thought, yeah. And I've been to Tijuana before, 20 or so years before. Karen and I had been there, and I thought, well, it can't be that different. So anyway, we're driving down, and we visit San Diego. While we're in San Diego, we're in a shop, and we decide to get an American phone and a SIM card just so that we can have contact. And the Mexican girl that was serving us said, and where are you going? And we said, oh, we're just going to pop down to Tijuana for a couple of days. And she just stared at us in horror. And she said, you're what? And we said, we're just going to pop over the border to Tijuana for a couple of days. And she was like, listen. She goes, listen, I'm Mexican and I don't go there. Well, that was kind of the first time I thought, ooh. But I told her, look, it's going to be all right because we're going to park the car, and then we're going to catch a bus, and we're all going to go over, and that bus is going to take us direct to our motel, and then we're going to be in the middle of Touristville, and it's all going to be fine. And she was like, okay, she gave us all the stuff. She said, don't go to money machines, all right? Don't drink the water, don't eat the food, don't sleep, don't do anything, don't walk around. And I was like, oh, wow. So I'm like, hey, it's going to be all right. I've already booked the motel. Let's go. So off we go. Anyway, we get to the border. There's a last turnoff, right? If you don't take this turnoff, you're driving into Mexico. And I knew about this turnoff, right? But I'm so busy talking to Leah and telling her about what happened 20 years ago when me and Mum were there, and it was great, and that as I looked up at the sign, this big sign, I drove past it, and I saw the words that said last, and that was all I saw because we were driving, and I realized that I had done something really dumb. I had driven past the last turnoff. So as you do, you desperately look around, and you're like, hey, there's got to be a place to turn around. If anyone's been to Tijuana, once you pass that last turnoff, there is nowhere to turn around. There's this massive wall that runs just all the way to the border, and you cannot turn around or get to the border. And the guards with their machine guns, and I'm trying to explain to them, listen, I can't go over that border. I've actually got to go back the other way. I made a big mistake. And the guy with his machine gun said, you go. I was like, what, go where? And he says, you go, Mexico. I'm like, no, I can't, mate. You go. So I'm like, you got the machine gun? Okay. So we drove, and he said, just turn around. When you go, you turn around. I went, there must be a place to turn around. Here's something else you'll discover if you happen to drive into Mexico by mistake. There's nowhere to turn around. We're driving, and I'm saying to Leah, I'm having a laugh, I said, oh man, this is funny. We'll just turn around, we'll head back. Easy, no problem. As we started going along this carriageway, there was nowhere to turn around. There's this big wall that goes on forever, and then when the big wall finishes, there's this massive river. And it's just, you're just going. And we're driving, and we're driving. Here's one thing that we notice. There's no GPS. So we're like, no GPS. All right, okay. So I get the phone. American phones don't work in Mexico, by the way, just in case you go. No point in getting an American phone with American SIM card, because as soon as you cross that border, so we've got no phone. We got no GPS, and we're just driving, and we don't understand the language, so all the signs are like, man, what are we? So we're driving. The other thing that's starting to happen, because they said don't drive in the dark in Mexico, it's dangerous. It was getting dark, and it was starting to rain, which is just added to the kind of feeling, bit of ambiance, rain, it's starting to dark, it's dusk. And what we noticed was coming out of all the favelas, I don't know if you watch those movies or if you watch documentaries, but they just have these like shanty towns where people live and they're just like tin stuff and cardboard and whatever. And people are just starting to seep out onto the road. And I'm telling you, I started to think, ooh. And we're driving, and I'm tempted to stop and ask someone, hey, how do we get back to San Diego? But I'm like, no, I am not stopping. We're just going to go. We're going to go. And we just kept driving deeper and deeper into who knows where. By this time, I'm not feeling like a very responsible dad. All the sort of chatter and the laughter is kind of gone, and we're just like, a few serious prayers start to go up. And I'm like, Leah, we'll be all right. Let's just keep going. So we keep going, and I can see up ahead that there's a fork in the road. You're either going to go left or you're going to go right. And I'm like, okay, Lord, left or right? You need to tell me left or right, left or right. I don't know, left or right. And I'm like, if I turn right, there's favelas. I don't want to get caught up in there. If I turn left, there's favelas. I don't want to get caught up in there. Lord, you tell me left or right, left or right. Just before we get there, I'm like, woof, left. We go left. Well, it's kind of a good thing we went left, because a few kilometers down the road, there was this one sign, only one sign that we could understand, and it said San Diego. I said, yes. I don't know if you've ever had that feeling where you've gone like, yes. So, to cut a long story short, we get our way back, we get into Tijuana, we find our motel, we have a great couple of nights, and we're back to tell a great story to our grandkids one day. Faith. What is it? What does it look like? We've been in Hebrews, and we've been chugging through the book of Hebrews. Norm and I, we've been drawing circles, and if you've been here for the last few weeks, you've probably seen some of the circles that we've been drawing, and I'm just wondering if we can chuck up this first slide. We've been talking about what we're discovering about God is that God has a zone, and in the God zone, it's outside of our zone, and Jesus comes from this zone, and the Hebrew word for this, or the Greek word for this zone, is the life zone, or the Zoe. Now, I heard Norm say the word, I said Zoe, because I'm Kiwi, but when Norm said it, it sounded really Greek. So now I'm going to say it too, it's like Zoe. This Zoe zone, and this is the zone that God lives in, and where his God life comes from. And then we discover that there's another zone, and this zone is called Psyche, which is the Greek word for the reality that we live in our world. And because of sin, we have the God zone and our zone totally separate from each other, and there's no hope of salvation from our own reality until the next thing happens that we read about in the book of Hebrews, is that Jesus comes along. Jesus, he's the better priest. He's the better sacrifice. He's the better human representative. He's the better everything. And he provides an opportunity for us to step into life eternal, into the God zone, by accepting his invitation to do so. And then we get to Hebrews 10, kind of 30, 32, where we stop talking about Jesus, the better this and the better that and the better priest and Melchizedek and all those great examples of the lengths that Jesus goes to save us. And the tone kind of changes from that to this. Given all of that we've just been talking about, given all of the things that Jesus is the better priest, he's the better human representative, he's the better messenger, he has a better gospel, he has a better covenant. Given all of that we've just been talking about, what does that mean for you, human being? What should be produced as a result of understanding and accepting all that we've just been talking about? And the next slide shows us that what we start to talk about from here on in, from Hebrews 11 on in, is that knowing all of that and accepting all of that should produce somebody of faith. It should produce a person of faith. And what does a person of faith look like? Well, a person of faith is somebody for whom God's Zoeness is expanding in your life through the grace and the goodness of Jesus Christ, that you're becoming more Christ-like because of everything that you've accepted and everything that you understand previously in Hebrews. And then it does this thing in chapter 11. It says this. Hebrews goes, what does that look like? And we get into Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, if you're not familiar with it, is what people often call the faith chapter. The faith chapter. And I just want to go to our first text in Hebrews, which is not Hebrews 11, but Hebrews 10, verse 34, because I think this is where the faith chapter starts. Around Hebrews 10, verse 30 to 34. And this is what verse 34 says. You suffered along with those who were thrown into jail. This is referring to people for whom the book of Hebrews was written. The writer of the book of Hebrews was written to people who were being persecuted for what they believed and were maybe losing a little bit of faith, losing a little bit of hope. And the writer says this, you suffered along with those who were thrown into jail, and when all you owned was taken from you, you accepted it with joy. You knew there were better things waiting for you that will last forever. If you accept what everything Hebrews says from Hebrews chapter 1 through to Hebrews chapter 10 to this point, this is the type of person you become. You understand? Like, if you lose everything, and I want you to think of what you own. I want you to think of how you live, what you have, your TV, whatever it is that you love, whatever it is that gives you comfort in your psyche experience. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 34 says, if you accept the betterness of Jesus Christ, then this is what you will become. You'll become the type of person who, if you lost everything, you can still have what? Joy. You will still have joy even if you lose everything. And then Hebrews chapter 11 goes on to give us examples of people like this, and it mentions people like Abel. That Abel, by faith, he brought his sacrifice by faith, and it talks about Abraham, by faith, he left his home and just followed where God told him to go. And by faith, his wife Sarah, by faith, Sarah had a child at the age of, does anyone know? 90? Wow. By faith, and by faith, Abraham went to offer Isaac, and by faith, Isaac this, and by faith, Jacob. All these great examples of faith, of these people that through faith seem to have great outcomes in life. But then this, in the same faith chapter, we see this example. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions. They quenched the flames of fire and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put whole armies to flight. This is what faith can do. I mean, just reading that I hope it makes you feel like, wow, this is what faith can do. Women received their loved ones back again from death. Wow. But then in the very same chapter, it says this, but others were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Some were jeered at, and their backs were cut open with whips. Others were chained in prisons. Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half, and others were killed with the sword. Some went about wearing skins of sheep and goats, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. All these people earned a good reputation because of their faith, yet none of them received all that God had promised, for God had something better in mind for us, so that they would not reach perfection without us. I don't know what you get from that, but here's what I notice. being people of faith doesn't necessarily mean that you end up with what you might think is a great outcome. Is that? Being people of faith doesn't mean that you will end up with what you think might be a great outcome. I mean, I don't think being burned is a great outcome. But they're in the faith chapter, just as much as Abraham and Isaac, who were victorious, are in the faith chapter. I get the impression what the writer is trying to tell us is that faith has nothing really to do with your outcomes in this life, but it has everything to do what God has promised for you in Zoe, in his life, in the God life. Struggling and suffering seems to produce faith or reliance on God. This morning I want us to have a gloves-off experience with God, an honest discussion with God. I don't know if you've ever had experiences in your life where something happened, something traumatic happened, and whatever that was became the focus of everything. You may have experienced something like that. You may be experiencing something like that now, that feeling that you get where you can't sleep, where you can't think of anything else, that you cry out to God, maybe even scream out to God because of this one thing. I remember quite a few years ago, Karen and I were here in Auckland, and I think we were at this church. It was sort of in the 1980s, sort of 89 period of Papster here. And we had a youth camp. We took some young people away to Tracy's batch that they had out there. Where was it? Whangamata, that's the one. And we were there on a Friday night, and I remember I got a phone call. And it was my mum. And I asked Mum and Dad if I could share the story, and they were cool with it. I said to Mum said to me, "Son, I need to tell you something." And I said, "Yeah, sure, what's up?" And Mum said, "Son, me and your dad are finished. We're over. We're separating." And I couldn't believe it. I mean, when you grow up and you have like your mum and dad and they're like the rock of your life and they're together and you look up to them and you admire and you listen to everything they teach you and stuff. And then Mum rings me and says, "Look, we're over," and it was such a shock. I couldn't believe it. I remember coming away, I remember weeping, I remember I couldn't sleep. I remember crying out to God and asking, "What is going on? How can this happen? How can this be? Can you fix it?" I remember for nights after praying that prayer, "God, can you fix it?" But he wasn't fixing it. As a matter of fact, Dad stayed in Christchurch, Mum moved to Napier. I was like, "What?" I says, "Lord, I'm asking you to fix this and it's getting worse. What are you doing? Where are you?" I don't know if you've had experiences. I know you have. And I know there are people here who have those types of heart-wrenching discussions with God. And we're not the only ones, because in Psalms 22, verse 1 to 2, I want you to just read this. The words of the psalmist. my God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far away when I groan for help? Every day I call to you, my God, but you do not answer. Every night you hear my voice, but I find no relief." Now, those words were written like 3,000 years ago. But I imagine that they have been your words. There's been times in my life where they've been my words, and there'll probably be times to come when they'll be my words again. And this morning I want to talk to you about our God struggles, because I really believe we could talk about what faith means and do an exegesis on chapter 11, but unless we can understand what it means to have it or to come to faith, I just really want to have that session with you this morning. I want to talk to you about our God struggles. I want you to feel like you have permission to take the gloves off, to have an honest moment with God. And here's the thing, like, I can't offer you any quick fix about the God struggle that you might be in right now. But maybe the answer isn't in the quick fix. Maybe God is to be found not in the quick fix, but in the fight. Maybe God is to be found not in the quick fix, but in the fight. One of the characters mentioned in chapter 11 of Hebrews is Jacob. And just a little bit of a background on Jacob. Jacob was the son of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham, this great patriarch. Jacob was a twin, not an identical twin, but he was a twin, and he had a twin brother. And the story, his name, Jacob or Yaakov in the Hebrew, has a meaning, and it means at the heel, or maybe closer to the meaning, tripping at the heel. I don't know if anyone's ever been ankle tapped. It's not a nice feeling. Someone comes behind you while you're running and they just tip your ankle and off you go, spinning head over heels. This is what I get the feeling that Jacob's name means, someone who trips people at the heel. And Jacob was a master schemer. He got his brother's birthright. Very clever. A birthright is two-thirds of the income, and whoever's after you gets a third. It's a lot. Jacob tricked Esau, and he got that birthright. Jacob got his father's blessing that Esau should have gotten. Jacob got the best sheep somehow. He got the best of everything. He was a great schemer. But his scheming catches up to him, and one day he finds himself on the run. His father-in-law is chasing him with a small army from behind him. His brother Esau, who has now become a strong tribal leader, has 400 armed men coming at him from this side. His father-in-law is chasing him from this side, and he is panicking, and he is not in a very good way. Let's pick up the story in verse 22. And it says this: during the night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 servant wives, and his 11 sons, and crossed the Jabbok River with them. After taking them to the other side, he sent over all his possessions. This left Jacob all alone in the camp, and a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you what? I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man says, "What is your name?" He replied, "Jacob." The man says, "Your name will no longer be Jacob," the man told him. "From now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won." "Please tell me your name," Jacob said. "Why do you want to know my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. Just want to look at this excerpt in Scripture. Because you see, from this point, Jacob's life changes completely. He reconciles with his brother. He lives with more humility. He lives with more generosity. And it's as if his fight with God is what really restores his life with God. It's as if it's his fight with God is what really restores his life with God. But why? I just want to explore. Some strange things about God are kind of apparent in this story. The first thing is that God starts the fight. Like, I thought God is the guy that when you're in trouble, I mean, think about it. Jacob is just sitting there, distressed, like freaking out. Isn't God meant to like come and wrap his big, warm, cuddly arms around you and like comfort you and say stuff like, "I will never leave you or forsake you"? Shouldn't he say stuff like that? Jacob is sitting there all alone, running through his mind is what's about to happen to his family, and it's not nice. And God picks a time like that to pick a fight with Jacob. No gentle prompting. And what a fight this is. He's fighting, I think we believe he's fighting an angel. That's what most commentators would say. He's fighting an angel. And it's not just like, round 1, round 2, round 3. It's constant all night, not stopping, all the way until the sun comes up. That's some fight. And this angel actually gets to a point where the angel goes, I'm not going to win this. I'm not going to win just fighting with this guy. I need to do something miraculous here. And he grabs his hip and he wrenches it out of its socket. I think that would stop me fighting. Would it stop you? I think that might fix me. I think I'd be done. I think I'd be like, okay, you win. Not Jacob. Not Jacob. He's got a wrenched out socket. I imagine that he's totally worn from fighting an angel. But he doesn't let go. He just keeps holding on. And he says, I'm not going to let go until you bless me. God picks the fight. And then he does something that is intrusive, it's painful, and it's humbling. God picked the fight, you know why? I think to get Jacob's attention. And he needs to get Jacob's attention, you know why? Because Jacob loved to scheme. And he needs to get my attention, and he needs to get your attention sometimes, and he needs to fight with you because you and I love to scheme. Love to scheme. Remember, I don't know if I quite have the story right, and I probably should have checked it with Karen before I tell it, but from how I remember it, Karen and I met at Longburn College, and across from Longburn College was this, she's giving me signals, across from Longburn College, I'll just look this way, was Sanitarium Health Food Company, and they had this awesome garden. And she knew I liked her, and I kind of knew she liked me, but we hadn't kind of, said it. And so I thought of a scheme, because I like scheming, and I thought, I'm going to, I think I'm going to ask Karen after the Friday night Vesper program thingy that I'm going to ask her if she wants to go for a walk, because she'll just think it's just a walk. Just a walk. And so she says, yeah. So that's plan 1, that's good. Plan 2, I'm going to tell Karen a little story. You know those stories you tell about a mate that you know? I have this friend, and this friend really likes this girl, but he thinks she's a bit out of his league, and he doesn't know what to do, and he's wondering what he should do. And I turn to her and I say, what would you say to my friend? What would you say that he should do? It's a good scheme, isn't it? Boys, are you listening? It's a pretty good one. What would you say that he should do? And she goes, you know what? You should tell him to to get some courage and man up and tell her. And in the moment, I'm like, I am that man. Well, it was a scheme, and it worked, but wow, we love to scheme. We love to have our plans and our ways of tackling things. The subtle danger about the way we are with our scheming is that we learn to scheme so well that we habituate this behavior. We get to a point where we begin to use our schemes and plans to build and secure our lives to a point where there is barely any tangible evidence of relying on God. Did you hear that? I know I'm just talking about me now. I'm preaching to myself as well. I get to scheme so much, and I get to rely on my schemes, and I get to be pretty good at it to a point that there's no tangible evidence of me relying on God hardly ever. John Ortberg, who I love his preaching and his wisdom, says that the average Christian, and I think we have a slide for this, that the average Christian becomes a believer as a child through family or church experience. And then the average Christian, the concept of God quickly becomes part of their worldview. Then the next step is that as he or she moves into adulthood, self-reliance and success becomes the motivations for life. Life becomes the strange blend of God belief and self-sufficiency until finally the idea of faith may remain a part of life, but he or she looks no different from the average non-Christian and how everyday life is actually conducted. Because here's the tension that we all live in. We have a theology of God, what we hope to be true about God. But then on the other hand, we have this geography. What is actually happening in our everyday life, the things that happen to us. And the tension that we live in is this tension between what we hope to be true about God and how we respond to the everyday things that happen to us in our everyday life. Is it possible today that the way we conduct our everyday lives is no different to people who don't believe in God? And in many ways, that's me. In many ways, that may be you. And in many ways, it was definitely Jacob. Which I think is why God picked a fight with him. God picking a fight with you? God has to show us that when it comes to our career, our home, our kids, our future, our fundamental need is not a better plan or not a better scheme. Our fundamental need is God. Do you believe it? Because that's what God wants to fight with you about. C.S. Lewis in his book mentions, in his book called Till We Have Faces, he says this: we cannot see God face to face until we are willing to bear our face to God. We cannot see God face to face unless we are willing to bear our own face to God. Jacob says, I will not let you go until you bless me. In his struggle with God, he's like, I'm sticking with you until you show up. And sometimes the heart of holiness and the heart of faith is just hanging on. Have you ever had that phone call about the person on the other line saying the prognosis doesn't look good? Have you ever had that phone call where they've said, I don't want to be in this marriage anymore? You are a young person who wants to feel God, who wants God to be real to you. And maybe that's when you need to hold on to him. And maybe this is what you need to hear this morning. You see, because when you battle with God, when you struggle with God, you come away a little bit wounded, I think. Like Jacob, he walks into this fight, but he limps away from it. He doesn't come out the same. But here's the thing about faith and about struggling and about holding on, is that there's also a blessing when you do that. See, God gives Jacob a new name, and the name is Israel. Israel. And there's a few meanings for Israel and a few debates, but Israel can mean someone who holds on, someone who perseveres with God. Jacob, the one who schemes, has become the one who sticks it out with God. And all this happens in the middle of a fight. God doesn't give him a whole set of new circumstances. He just gives him a new name. And he turns Jacob into a new person. Because Jacob said, I'm not going to let it go until you bless me. The circumstances don't change for Jacob, but Jacob as a person changes. And maybe this is what God is up to in your life. Maybe your struggle with God and his struggle with you is not for the purpose of changing your circumstances. maybe it's for the purpose of changing you. Maybe your struggle with God and God's struggle with you is so that you will bring your true face to God, your true face, like Jacob did. Like, I'm not going to let you go till I see your face, until you ask me who I am. I want to show you who I am. I don't know if any of you get bored with your prayers. Anyone have that experience where you're praying? Like, I try to get up most mornings and I pray, and sometimes I pray myself to sleep because my prayers are so boring. Here's a little tip for you. Here's a little way to know whether or not God is bored with your prayers. If you're bored with your prayers, God is probably bored with your prayers as well. Sometimes we need to pray some real prayers to God. Not the thank you for the lovely day and that's about me, thanks. But real prayers that struggle, that cry out to God. I had a good friend who used to tell me how he would pray to God, and I'm telling you, it was R-rated. It was like, he's bringing his true face to God. And whatever your struggle is, whether you're a young person in this church, or whether you're an older person in this church, or wherever you are at in life, I want to challenge us this morning to bring our true face to God. Because you see, about 1,000 years after Jacob asked this stranger to tell him his name, Jacob goes, "Can you tell me your name?" The stranger doesn't really answer him. What Jacob is really saying is, "Show me your face." And the stranger only partially shows Jacob, but not everything. But I think 1,000 years later, we get to fully see the face. And it's the face of the man we call Jesus, the better sacrifice, who hung on a cross, taking all our pain, all our agony, all our struggles, all our stuff. That's the face, the true face of God. And just moments before that night, just moments before that day where he was crucified, he does something really amazing. He shares a meal with his buddies, his followers, his disciples. Before the pain comes, before people can show their true face, Jesus did this often. He would share a meal. He did it with Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus showed his true face over a meal. He did it with Matthew in the parties that they would go to, and this is where people showed their true face to God, over a meal. And this morning, I'm going to ask that you show your true face. That the struggle that you're struggling with, this thing that you're angry with God with, this thing that you're too afraid to bring to him because you think he might not be able to handle it. Just in this place, I want you to bring your true face. And I couldn't think of any better way to invite you to do this than over a meal. Now, this isn't communion service for those who know what that is. This isn't anything like that. This isn't that thing that we do. I just simply couldn't think of a better way for us to bring our true faces to God than over a meal. And so we have a table here, and on that table is some bread. And I want to invite you if you need God to show up in your life, I want to invite you to come and have a meal with him. It's one of the things I struggle with personally. Like I find it real hard to be totally, honest with God. To have those type of heart-wrenching prayers. I've done them. But I find it difficult Maybe it's because I'm Kiwi and we don't like to open up too much. I'm not much of a soul bearer. I don't bear my soul. I know people bear their soul. But today I want to bear my soul as I've been preparing the sermon. And I've kind of been and felt the need to do that. And if you need to bear yours, if there's something that you're going through, if you're needing God to show up in your life, and if you're wondering where He is in your life, where are you? I've been fighting with you I've been asking you for this. Where are you? If you're wondering where God is for people that you love, that you've been praying for, I want you to have the audacity to come and share a meal. Do you believe in God, but are just realizing that you've never really relied on Him? And you want to tell Him that, and you want to bare your face? Come and have a meal with God. Are you sick of living in this lukewarm zone of knowing God but not feeling Him? And come and have a meal with Him. Are you tired of worrying about the future? Are you tired of worrying where the next dollar's going to come from? Come and have a meal with Jesus Christ and bare your face to Him. Has God made you aware of things in your life that need to change? But you're struggling to let go. Come and have a meal with Him. Just as you're coming, I'm going to ask the worshipers to come up. Why don't you come and just stay? Like grab a meal and maybe just come and just stay and let's worship and let's eat and let's bare our souls to God together. If you've come and you've sat down, come back up and just gather, just stay around and just worship with us and eat with us and bear your soul with us. Because this morning the gloves are off. This morning you're going to have the audacity to tell God that you're not going to let go until He blesses you. You're going to have the courage to say that to God this morning. I'm going to hold on to you until you bless me. Because I believe this is what it looks like to live in the faith chapter, to have a life of faith. Keep coming, and sing with us.